It was a sweltering summer night in Thailand. I was 16, restless, and bored out of my mind. My friends and I, we craved excitement, something to break the monotony. Little did I know, this night would change my life forever. The memory still sends chills down my spine even after all these years. It all started innocently enough. We were hanging out at our usual spot, a dimly lit street food stall, sharing stories and laughter. The air was thick with the aroma of spices and grilling meat, but the carefree atmosphere was shattered in an instant. A frantic call came through my friend's mobile phone. It was his uncle, his voice trembling with urgency. "There's been an accident," he choked out. "We need your help." We didn't hesitate for a second. We piled into my friend's pickup truck, a sense of dread settling over us. The humid air inside the truck felt heavy, suffocating. As we sped through the deserted streets, our anxiety multiplied with every passing moment. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, and the silence in the truck was deafening. We were headed to the provincial hospital, a dilapidated building on the outskirts of town, shrouded in an unsettling quiet. The drive seemed endless. The night was thick with an almost tangible darkness, and the road seemed to stretch on forever, an unbroken line disappearing into the abyss. Each mile we covered felt like an eternity, the monotony only broken by the occasional flicker of headlights from distant cars. The road stretched before us, swallowed by the darkness beyond our headlights. The silence inside the car was deafening, punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt. We were all lost in our thoughts, each of us grappling with the weight of the journey ahead. The only sounds were the roar of the engine and the frantic beating of our hearts. The tension in the car was palpable, a heavy blanket that seemed to smother us. Every now and then someone would shift in their seat, the creak of the leather breaking the silence momentarily. We finally arrived at the hospital, a ghostly silhouette against the night sky. The building loomed over us, its windows dark and foreboding. It looked like something out of a horror movie, a place where nightmares were born. We hesitated for a moment, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on us. An air of unease hung heavy as we stepped out of the truck. The cold night air bit at our skin and we pulled our jackets tighter around us. The hospital seemed to watch us with empty eyes, and we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed by unseen forces. The silence was broken only by the distant howling of stray dogs, their mournful cries sending shivers down our spines. It was as if the dogs were mourning with us, their howls a lament for the soul we had come to collect. The sound echoed through the empty streets, a haunting melody that seemed to follow us as we made our way inside. We were met by my friend's uncle, his face etched with worry and grief. His eyes were red-rimmed, and it was clear he hadn't slept in days. He greeted us with a somber nod, his voice barely above a whisper as he explained the situation. The weight of his sorrow was almost too much to bear. He explained that his brother had passed away in a tragic accident and we were to transport the body back to their village. The news hit us like a punch to the gut, and for a moment we were all speechless. The reality of the situation settled over us like a dark cloud, and we knew that the road ahead would be even longer and more difficult than we had imagined. We followed him through the desolate hospital corridors, the pungent smell of disinfectant assaulting our senses. The walls, once white and pristine, were now stained and peeling, telling tales of neglect and abandonment. Each step echoed ominously, amplifying the sense of dread that hung in the air. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows on the walls, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The occasional buzz and flicker of the lights made the shadows dance, creating ghostly figures that seemed to follow us. It felt as if the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating us with their oppressive presence. Finally, we reached a dimly lit room. The air was thick with dust, and the faint light barely pierced the darkness, casting an eerie glow on the objects within. The room seemed frozen in time, untouched for years, with an unsettling stillness that made our skin crawl. And there it was, a simple wooden coffin resting on a metal stand in the middle of the room. The wood was old and worn, with scratches and marks that hinted at a troubled past. It seemed out of place, a grim reminder of mortality in an already haunting setting. We carefully lifted the coffin onto the truck bed, our hearts pounding in our chests. The weight of the coffin was more than just physical. It carried with it the weight of our fears and uncertainties. Each of us felt the gravity of the moment, the significance of what we were doing. None of us dared to speak as we secured the coffin, the silence punctuated by our heavy breathing. The tension was palpable, a shared understanding that words could not capture. We worked methodically, our movements synchronized by an unspoken agreement to get the job done as quickly and efficiently as possible. With the grim cargo loaded, we climbed back into the truck, the weight of the coffin and the darkness pressing down on us. The vehicle felt cramped and suffocating, the air thick with unspoken fears and the oppressive weight of our task. Each of us was lost in our thoughts, contemplating the journey ahead. The return journey began, and with every mile the atmosphere grew heavier, more oppressive. The road stretched out before us, a seemingly endless path shrouded in darkness. The hum of the engine was the only sound, a constant reminder of the burden we carried. Each passing moment felt like an eternity, the weight of our mission pressing down on us with relentless force. The darkness outside the truck seemed to press in on us, suffocating. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes peering at us from the shadows. The silence was broken by my friend's uncle, who began to share stories about his deceased brother. He spoke in hushed tones about strange occurrences, unexplainable events that had plagued his brother in life. His words hung heavy in the air, fueling our fear and imagination. Then, it started. A soft scratching sound, like fingernails scraping against wood, came from the truck bed. We exchanged uneasy glances. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from inside the coffin. Our blood ran cold. The truck lurched violently as the coffin rattled violently. We gripped our seats, fear gripping us like a vice. The scratching became a frantic clawing, the sound echoing in the night. My friend's uncle began to pray, his voice trembling with terror. The truck swerved dangerously as we struggled to maintain control amidst the chaos. The coffin bucked and heaved, as if something was trying to break free from within. Then, with a deafening crack, the coffin split open. Our headlights illuminated a scene straight out of a nightmare. A pair of glowing red eyes stared back at us from the shattered coffin. The corpse, its face contorted in a grotesque expression of rage, sat upright. Its pale, decaying hand reached out towards us, its long, sharp fingernails scraping against the metal of the truck bed. We were paralyzed with terror, our screams caught in our throats. The stench of death filled the air, suffocating us. Time seemed to stand still as we stared into the face of death, the corpse's ragged breathing filling the silence. Adrenaline surged through my veins, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Every nerve in my body was on high alert, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my back. The night was dark and full of terrors, and we were right in the middle of it. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, desperate to escape the nightmare unfolding before us. The engine roared to life and the car shot forward like a bullet. My hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, every muscle in my body tensed for the flight ahead. The truck lurched forward, the corpse's hand narrowly missing my friend's uncle. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie, but this was no fiction. The hand, pale and lifeless, seemed to reach out with a malevolent intent, and we barely escaped its grasp. I drove like a madman, the truck careening down the narrow road, branches whipping at the windshield. The road was barely visible in the dim light, and every turn felt like it could be our last. The trees seemed to close in on us, their branches like skeletal fingers trying to pull us back into the darkness. The corpse's enraged screams echoed behind us, fueling our terror. It was a sound that chilled us to the bone, a reminder that we were being hunted. The screams grew louder, more desperate, as if the very night itself was crying out for our souls. I didn't dare look back, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. Every second counted, and I knew that a single glance could mean the difference between life and death. The road stretched out before us, a narrow path to salvation, and I was determined to follow it to the end. We drove until the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The first light of dawn brought a glimmer of hope, a promise that the nightmare was finally over. The colors of the sunrise were a stark contrast to the darkness we had just escaped, a reminder that there was still beauty in the world, a stark contrast to the horrors of the night. The peaceful morning light seemed almost surreal after the chaos we had endured. It was as if the world had been reborn, cleansed of the terror that had haunted us just hours before. We finally reached our village, exhausted and terrified, our bodies and minds pushed to their limits. The familiar sights of home brought a sense of relief, but the fear still lingered, a shadow that would take time to fade, forever marked by the night's events. The experience had changed us, left an indelible mark on our souls. We knew that we would never be the same, that the horrors of that night would stay with us forever, a dark chapter in our lives that we could never forget. The memory of that night continues to haunt me, a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of reality. To this day, I can still hear the scratching, feel the terror that gripped us, and see the glowing red eyes of the corpse. It was a night that changed my life forever, a terrifying encounter with the supernatural that I will never forget. Some may doubt my story, dismiss it as a figment of a terrified teenager's imagination, but I know what I saw, I know what we experienced, and that terrifying truth will stay with me forever.